I think honestly, a good way to kick this off is to kind of just pick up on what we were talking about prior to the recording started, or wherever we'll edit this from, because we were just talking about like things being back and what that actually means. But context, top left, actually, I don't know the order that people are going to see this in, but navy polo, who looks like a cop, that's been Edgar. He is an object designer, founder of a bunch of incredible things and good friend of the brand. The trio in the orange and green, that's PLAYLAB. They do the show design and I guess just designers in general for a lot of stuff. Soundboard for most things that are impressive, I guess. And then Winslade tattoos, Infinite Archives t-shirt, friend of the brand, graphic designer. Yeah, everyone here directly worked on the show in some shape or form. We're missing Andre. He probably will pop up at some point. But yeah, I think we should just continue as to what we were talking about, the future of fashion shows and what it all looks like.
Well, I want to ask you, Reese, like you've done how many videos now? 2 or 3?
This was the third one.
Okay. I thought we were texting some time ago and you're ready to like get back to shows that people attend and that have a little bit more of like interaction from the crowd. But like my question to everybody in the industry is I keep getting these like tweets or texts or whatever that are saying some of this stuff is better than the shows have ever been, but there's this human element missing. So I guess as a designer, how do you think through that? Having people there, the energy.
Yeah, I think there, at least in my perspective, what you can do creatively with cameras and a recording versus what you can do with like real life limitations of being in the city for a fashion week is just incredibly different. I think being able to record it is very helpful for like actual brand building and like bringing in like narrative elements of everything. Plus you can do it anywhere in the world. So you can tie in like the actual locations and inspirations from a collection versus trying to just get that across with graphics and a color palette. But yeah, you do lack a lot of the in-person like energy from it. It's we did the show with like, I don't know, like 50 or so like friends in the audience, and that was really fun. But once it's over, it's just like over. What was nice about Fashion Week while it was happening is like there's energy throughout the whole week, and you get the whole benefit on the market side as well from being in the same places the people who you work with in terms of like buying with stores. So it's a really like, I could go either way. I really like the brand building part of it with the videos, but I do miss being in a city that feels like more functional with like energy and momentum for a company.
I've always joked that like the best part of a fashion show is the dinner afterwards sometimes.
Yeah,
with all
honestly.
your friends and you're chatting about it and you go right from the show and you're like kind of high off the energy of it and stuff.
We did something at this little restaurant near me downtown. But yeah, it was cute, but it feels, there's also that disconnect of like, we had that night like 2 weeks ago, and then it just, you got to get back to work the next day and start editing and start like photographing. So it never actually, it felt very, it's very anticlimactic.
That's fair. Would you ever do both?
In terms of what?
Stuff, but
What do you mean?
like, maybe you make a trailer for it, or you take the footage from the live show and really try and, your show, that would have been difficult with yours, but I'm wondering if people are when this is all over, they're gonna kind of miss the creative control they had with video.
Probably. There's got to be a way to tie both together though.
I think so. PLAYLAB, you guys?
I think that's a great idea. For sure. I feel like, I think the thing that we all love about the live shows and the thing that unites the live shows and the videos, I think probably from our perspective, is like the theater nature of it. Like it feels theatrical. And that's what's cool about Reese's films now, the past 3, is that it is a show. Like there are friends that are sitting there and you feel involved and it feels cool, but it is an artifact that's sort of crafted and created, and you have time to form it, inform the image of the way you want people to kind of perceive the whole thing. I imagine that the way that these, the best of the films that are coming out during these fashion weeks, I hope will push the nature of the live show. I don't think the live show is going to go away. I think they're just going to get more thoughtful. Any creative industry that has like a system and an institution around it can get tired and rote over time. So I think my perspective is that these shows just became a little boring because there's like a system and like a recipe for them. And the goal is just to kind of play and fuck with the recipe. Like you still want people to attend, you still want to have a good time, you still want to show the clothes, but like everything else around that is up for debate. So I feel like we'll all do that again once live shows fully return. And then we'll do 3 of those and then it'll probably change again, you know, because we're going to want to fuck with it. Yeah,
With a small brand, Reese, what's the, I don't think people understand. I think a lot of people think this is a cost savings thing. Like it's not always, right? I mean,
What, video versus show?
Yeah.
The videos actually cost more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I would assume that a lot of people, I mean, there's some that are produced to the level like the Tom one, and obviously, but like even it's like you can tell yours was expensive if you even know a little bit. But I do think there's people who are like, man, this is like a crazy cost savings thing. I'm not sure it is.
Yeah, no, it's pretty on par with whatever the cost was for that first thing we did at Palais de Tokyo, January of 2020. The invoices for these past few things have all been actually quite similar.
And
This was, I mean, way less than last season was. So there was some cost saving there, but it's not cheap to do. We're just lucky to have a good team like Andre and his crew who works for Homies Rates, and he doesn't need to profit off of this because we'll get there at some point.
I think that was interesting though, kind of what you were saying, Ben and Archie, about like the optics of it, you know, like how someone on the outside, because we're all kind of looking at it from the perspective of people working on these shows and maybe attending these shows and kind of putting it all together and behind the scenes. But I do wonder like how the optics of Fashion Week has changed for like the general person, like kind of being able to tap in and see it online and maybe like not feeling the distance from it when you're seeing like 500 people like at the actual show itself. That kind of like democratization, I guess, of like the Fashion Week experience. But then also like how that plays off against like the perceived value of the show, like you were saying, Ben, like whether or not that kind of is a plus to some brands and like a negative to others. Like in the case of like Reese's collections, I feel like it's been a plus because you've had over these last 3 shows like the opportunity to kind of share the locations like in California that are like, you know, very much like within the brand itself. But there'll be like other companies that have probably struggled with that. Like they've been more kind of ingrained in that traditional like Fashion Week formula, and they've kind of been like, oh shit, like how do we pivot to that without like devaluing like how we're perceived? Yeah, I wonder like how you see that, Reese. Like have you seen it as like a benefit, kind of being forced into this like remote Fashion Week kind of situation? That the timing, I would say, seems pretty good, like from your brand's perspective, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think this happened like right at the formative years per se of like what the actual brand and company takes shape as. Like we had already booked the location for summer of last year, and the idea was like this private school in like the 5th district of Paris, and we were gonna put some like vinyl flooring down to make a little what looked like riverbed down the main pathway and fill it with water and have a waterfall and have models walk barefoot through that. And that was the idea from the start. And then you get closer to it and you're like, okay, we're gonna do this thing again that like there's not much like documentation or evidence that the first one at Palais de Tokyo happened. Like there's no video I can go back and watch the show. There's some stuff on it, which is cool, but I can't like physically just watch the show. And so it's hard to be like in the mindset of like these cost this much money every time. And it costs twice as much if you want it professionally filmed as well while you're in Paris. And so the opportunity to not actually have to go and do that and be able to do it exactly how we wanted, not have to start at an exact time and be upset that XYZ people aren't in whatever row, really helped overall, like the first time. And then once it came time to do the second one, it's like, well, I've only done one of each format, so I'm comfortable with either. And now I'm pretty much just comfortable with the video stuff. I look forward to going back to Paris and doing actual runway shows, but the thought process of having to do things like in one take, perfect, in reality, it's scary as much as it is exciting, because we're not like perfectionists. We still only have a couple hours to knock out everything that we do every time. But there is just more control when you get to hold a camera before anyone sees it.
I was really excited after your show to see everybody's reaction on social media and things like that. I mean, I'm like the rest of the world, maybe a little burned out on social media after the past like months, or just like so much of it. But it is nice that everybody all watched at the exact same time. I mean, I know stuff came out on Vogue.com like that and people would kind of dissect it, but this feels like, Tom, you were saying, it's very much like everyone gets to watch it and experience it at the same time. Very few people are seeing, like literally like less than 10 people are seeing it perhaps before it's done, before the general public does.
Yeah, no, less than 10 for sure. But then the other side of that is like, I have like 3 or 4 shows that I want to watch, like saved in my like watch later folder that I just haven't got to yet. So I think people, like myself included, are just burnt out on the whole digital fashion week thing. Like the whole, like working for 6 months, like the end goal is like the energy of the weekend, like finally just that like release and like, let's have a great week and have fun and see what happens. For that to happen on a laptop now is like, I'm over it.
So,
I think the end of the digital format doesn't mean the end of video per se. It doesn't mean that Reese has to like step away from like filming and having the control that you were talking about. It's like we can still show in Paris, and we can, like, we all watch movies, we all have like the Cannes festival and stuff like that, and it's about the community watching it together. You still have the energy, you're still watching a piece of art, and it may be a different format. It doesn't mean like that video is totally over in my mind, or is it like a mix of that and like everyone's getting out of it?
I think this goes back to what we were talking about for this next January show anyways. I think the working idea right now is still filming something and then just doing like some crazy theater, and then but then bringing in some sort of like presentation element with like actually having people or models there for the whole bit, and just like finding a way to intertwine those before we go back next summer to proper like let's do a runway thing. I think it honestly could just make sense per idea. Like the idea for next summer is definitely better as an actual runway thing, where the idea for like this next fall winter is probably better in this format.
Yep.
And once we're at a place where there's no, like, I mean, I'm quite comfortable and happy with either. I think it's probably best to just do whatever is best for the idea and getting that across, instead of thinking you have to do XYZ every time to keep up like appearances.
Exactly. And it should just be something that's like exciting. Like those 2 ideas you're talking about, like I think you came over to the studio and we were working on this show, and then we came up with like 75 ideas for other shows. And like,
yeah, we already, I mean, we have the concept and like location for June of 2022 already down.
Exactly. And then, but we were just so excited about it. So then you're just sort of like, well, as long as you're like overwhelmingly excited and stuck to something, then you kind of build the world around that. Like, I think the goal in general is just to not think about fashion or in general, like fashion week and the fashion, is just like, think about the brand and like what this collective of people really are excited about, and then just move that way and do it as good as you can and draw people to it, you know, because the platform you have is wide, people are watching. So as long as you keep doing what you want to do and feels right to you and this team.
Well, I think that's the only way that ideas even translate, because you can always tell whether it's a company or a person. As soon as something feels like a little left field, you can always tell.
Yeah.
Especially in this industry, because it's so emotionally driven. I mean, I guess that's one positive thing of this whole thing, is like it served as a reset that if someone wants to keep doing video forever, great, because Archie, to your point, like it made everybody stop and go like, is this compelling to watch? Am I excited about making this? Do I even want to be a fashion designer anymore? It stopped the treadmill that had been
The
in place
hamster
for so
wheel.
long that you couldn't get off of, you know? You
Yeah.
couldn't stop, because if you would have pivoted to video before this, people would have been like, is everything okay? Maybe the federation would have been like, no, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, about that.
It's
Interesting.
it's also from our perspective, like I feel like we're outside fashion, and like when you look at fashion campaigns like capital C, the photography is what's supposed to carry the weight of like the window into the brand and the story that you're trying to tell. And it only goes but so far. And it feels kind of humorous so much of the time when you're looking at these photo shoots,
I think so.
where the videos are becoming narrative driven. And then you have a completely different window into the brand that the long form video can do that photography just can't always do. It's a supplement, it's important, and it's iconic, and it's a piece of the puzzle. But I do feel like this whole situation has made room for the ability to kind of, give a much more, I don't know, like genuine perspective of what the brand is trying to say and do and move the needle on, and et cetera. Like this one, Fresh Air, is so iconic. It's like, it feels like it broke the mold in a couple small ways that are really meaningful and powerful, you know? But there still is a runway, in the scene for the runway, and the way the runway is done with the beautiful flags, and it's triumphant. It feels triumphant because there's a narrative attached to it. And that narrative is like through and through, down to the product collaboration with Merrill, et cetera. You know, it's if you feel it.
Yeah, you like breaking of the fifth wall, or I mean, I don't know if that's what you would call it, with the character who's both a model but also ties up the story at the end of it. I mean, I think you told me that, and it still surprised me. And I just don't know if that some of those things can be done like in the context of what existed before, the rules that existed before. And it's so funny because like fashion's supposed to break all the rules, but like it took a pandemic for that to actually like be,
Yeah.
you know.
No, and back to the point on like photo shoot versus long form video, I think for every one person who watches the video, there's going to be 500 people who see the photo.
Mm-hmm.
But you're, at the end of the day, like my favorite piece of advice I was given is like, you got to focus on like the smaller group of people who actually are going to take the time to watch this shit and care about it. Like the people who are just going to flip through a magazine and see a photo, like why even bother trying to have a dialogue with them? It's about like the focus is always on the people who actually care about the story being told. And then you can just keep building that world up, and eventually more people catch on to it, but cater to the people who actually will notice those details.
Exactly.
Especially a brand in your face, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was also just thinking like when you were talking then, Archie, about like the formats changing and kind of almost what's expected or like accepted from like a fashion brand like in this space, like how that changes moving forward in terms of Reese, like you capturing a show and then putting it out there. Like I remember when you were saying about the If a Tree Falls collection, like you don't have anything that you can kind of go back and watch now. It kind of happened in that moment. And then obviously you have the photography, you have like some behind the scenes stuff, but you don't have like the show that you can rewatch. And I wonder if like that's something that, like that may happen like when you return to more of like the physical runway show happening in the moment. And then obviously you have that lead time between the collection coming out in stores, like a whole year, like between people seeing it there and then being able to physically walk into a store and see it. I wonder if that's something that changes in terms of like you have that live experience and show that people who are there are like having, and then also you can document the show as a film like with Andre, and then put that out at a later date as like a kind of edited kind of recap and like look at that show from different perspectives, you know, so you have that kind of like 1-2 punch, and it also like increases the longevity of the show. I wonder if that's something that we'll start to see, you know, in the same way that like you could have like, I don't know, like Queen like live at Wembley performance, and you've got all these thousands of people who are there, and then like later in time people will kind of like rewatching that show and like rediscovering it, and it kind of just adds to this ongoing like experience of what that collection was, rather than it kind of existing in a moment and then kind of, you know, slowing it down basically.
I mean, slowing it down sounds ideal.
Every designer says that. That's so funny. I mean, think about how long they've been being said, and
I
now it's
know,
like
forever. And
accomplishing
I
that?
only do
Yeah.
2 collections a year. There's people who are doing like 8.
Yeah.
No, but Tom, to your point, I think filming it while it's happening is obviously something we need to do from now on, purely just from a documentation standpoint. But yeah, there's definitely going to be some sort of like, I mean, what people see in person is not what's going to be released as a video. Like that was the entire point of the show at PLAYLAB Tokyo. Like the concept was the lookbook that comes out is like, looks like it's in the woods, but to people who are in the room, you look like you stumbled upon a film set, and it looks janky as hell on purpose because no one's ever going to see that shit on Vogue anyways. So why clean it up? Yeah, just like releasing different things at different angles, but like of the same thing. It can be 2 completely different stories. It really just depends if Andre's willing to fly not first class.
Mm. Yeah, 100%.
I was gonna ask you, what was that, Archie? I'm sorry.
I was gonna say we could get Andre a jetpack.
I don't know how far those can go.
We'll have people re-up.
Yeah, in-flight fuel, refuel. I was gonna ask. My question is like, well, you guys talked about you had, 25 new ideas just from the first idea, but like, my first one was gonna be like, how do you approach the blank canvas? But is it ever blank for you, or is it kind of? I mean, obviously there's a story going on, but like, was this fashion show a blank canvas, or was like the idea before the collection, post collection? Like, how does that start integrating?
This was definitely blank canvas going into it. It was, we started sampling the collection a little bit late in the game due to like issues with manufacturing that we had to get through. And then I think we started thinking about the show concept around the normal time that we would, about 2 to 3 months prior. In an ideal world, you start sampling before that. But these probably started pretty hand in hand around the same week or 2. And so the concept originally going into it, because as a result, a reaction to the whole manufacturing like fallouts and disputes, is let's just make something a little bit smaller. Let's kind of do this as like a narrative driven campaign thing. Let's figure out like how to basically do the smallest collection we've done. And then location scouted at Crystal Lake, which was going to be our set, to do like a little like 5-minute narrative piece of someone walking through. The idea of someone still walking through POV and stumbling upon different things was there in the beginning. And then it just, once we saw the bridge, it kind of just turned into like, all right, let's just see what we can make happen here. And it turned out to be the most looks and biggest collection in terms of number of pieces that I've ever done, as well as probably like the biggest show overall in terms of like production. But those things start at the same time, and like knowing where we're shooting informs what I'm designing. If that answered your question at all.
Yeah, it did. I mean, I think it, it's never like a truly blank canvas, because you have this like, you've probably more than any other young brand I've seen. I think sometimes they're like, this is my new collection. I was inspired by this, so I'm going to shoot it like this. Like yours continually had this theme.
Yeah.
Your first show was hiking indoor. I mean, it was like, and I think like, do you find that restricting ever? I think I love it. It's why I buy the brands that I buy. I love the red thread,
Yeah, no, I don't think it's restrictive, because like if you, like on paper, we had people walk barefoot through a creek, and now we had a trail runner filmed in his perspective, and then we did something at the observatory. Like all of those 3 things are incredibly different. They follow like a through line, but I don't consider those very similar. Like I look at each of those as actually pretty different from each other.
Yeah.
So it still feels like new and fresh every time, but there is that like common theme between all of them, which just happens to be like nature outside activity.
For PLAYLAB, how much of your guys' process changes not from ideation, but when it finally starts to like making the things, you know, like I think in the show notes for the Vuitton show, there was some of the schematics and stuff, like actually look like blueprints and things like that, which I of course love stuff like that. But like, how much does it change when you're like, all right, people are going to be experiencing this versus like cameras experiencing this? And is that any different, or is it really kind of all the same when it comes down to production? It's just a different variable that you're working against.
Well, Vuittons or Reese Cooper could not be further apart from each other in terms of process. Like the goal of Reese is almost, in my mind, and maybe it'll change in the future, is like no set design. Like the set design is nature. It is finding an incredible location and building some narrative through that. That's what seems to be so powerful about the brand. You know, for me, these guys can speak to the insanity which ensues with the process of Vuitton.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the biggest change is just to kind of like, you don't have to worry about front row and all of that kind of bureaucracy around that as much. It's more about, it's still setting the stage for the story. That hasn't changed. The only thing that changes is really about like, you know, rather than where is the viewer going to see it, it's more about where can the camera see it? What are we trying to capture from that angle?
But even in editing, it changes at the 11th hour, because you may have got a shot that you really liked in the script, and then in edit, you're like, actually, like, we don't need it there, or we don't need it at all. We need some other thing to cut to, and you know,
it became kind of.
And we went back to the bridge and filmed pickup and insert shots on Sunday, like,
oh wow,
with Gordon, our trail runner again. I was just me, David, and him, just with like a little much smaller camera this time, but just attached to like a football helmet.
Wow.
I love that. I think the only, to answer your technical question, Ben, the only difference that we render things and we look at things like with the naked eye as well as a camera lens eye, which have different depth of views. So we try to find the sweet spot of where to place models versus the set so that you can capture the whole picture in both. Like, obviously it's going to be different in person, and for Reese's you had the models like in the middle of the bridge. In camera it almost looks like further than it looked when you're in person, and sometimes you can't like figure that out, so you have to find that sweet spot, especially now that I think fashion shows are going to move into like what we've been talking about. We're filming what's going to happen live, so this is going to be more of a technical issue, but it's a good problem to have.
Like as it's gone on, like we've done with LV shows and now even with Reese's show, like we've started to introduce the narrative into it. It just kind of came naturally because, you know, once we were able to not have an audience there, the video became less about like documenting a live experience and much more about telling a narrative. And where the narrative was always there within the set, but not so much about, you know, where they're walking through or how you're experiencing it from moment to moment. And I think that's something that we're all interested to see, like how that comes back into like even how you document a live show, or you know how that storytelling kind of like, I think that's what every brand has kind of done, is had to step up that game, whereas before, like you said, they were on the treadmill of just, you know, what was expected to do. And it was an unfortunate shakeup, but it was kind of like a needed creative kick in the ass to do something different, which I can't imagine it going back to the way it was for everybody, or at least people going back that way and enjoying it. We would.
Tell us how you
straightforward. You can expect this.
We've already seen some shows this week that were back to the old format, and wasn't exciting.
What do you think about those shows? What are those brands?
Yeah, who specifically, Jeff?
Say their names. I think, to your point about camera angles, that's actually quite interesting, because I think, again, this goes back to kind of the democratization. People are experiencing two completely different fashion shows or fashion experiences, you know, online, because it's like things can feel so much smaller in person. I mean, I've only been going to shows maybe for 5 or 6 years, And I remember going to like my first real production one, and sometimes you're surprised it's either much larger or much bigger, but it's never what you thought it was going to be in terms of like actual physical experience. How many people are there? All those things change. So again, back to everyone consuming it the same way. I mean, I don't, it's a little early to say if that's the best solution or not, but it is interesting that everyone is experiencing the clearest vision of it rather than there being multiple versions of it existing.
Yeah,
I
I
don't
think
know if we'll
that's
ever be able to solve for that, but it's an interesting thought.
I think that's
Yeah.
interesting too. You know, with the whole Reese, when you were filming this collection, like Fresh Air, obviously with people being given their own kind of disposable cameras to like capture the show from their perspective, and then you kind of being able to deliver them back to them like when the show comes out. That's like very different from having, you know, X amount of people at a live show. They all have their iPhones out, they're posting it straight to the internet. You almost like lose the I guess like in some ways the way that you would like to present it. It, like as Ben was just saying, you have like 1,000 different people kind of like interpreting the collection, displaying it in a certain way. Like how does that come into mind, like, you know, with like your decision like with this show, the whole like disposable camera thing, like how did that inform that?
I think that honestly just becomes like a question of how fast do you want stuff out there. Like that 2-week period where we're gonna have to edit things, unless you put something in people's hands, like to take pictures with, they're gonna take pictures on their phone and they're gonna post it whenever they get bored. And then that destroys, or not destroys, but like dilutes the whole point of trying to do this thing with such a clear vision and perspective that we're putting out like, here's the thing that everyone should see. This is the viewpoint you should watch it from, which is why we make the video. The disposables were honestly just like a fun thing to do. There wasn't that much thought process behind it, but I think that's probably what it comes down to though, is just not wanting too much stuff seen too early, because seeing it in person isn't entirely, or seeing it from one of the side benches, it's just not the same as like the camera angles we had. Like granted, it's the same thing happening at the same time, but like if you're sat on one of those benches, you're seeing a model pass you every 15 seconds and you're like, this is long as hell and I'm bored. But the camera at the back facing the whole thing, like you're seeing like 16 models at some times. And it's, that bridge is like 150, 200 meters long. Like it just feels like there's a lot of people there in the same time because of the camera angles. But when you're actually sat there, you're like, where is everybody?
I think the cranes are the new front row. VIP there.
You better write that down because that's a banger quote.
And I think everyone like thought like there was no way to fix that. It was like the Napster effect before. It was like you can't control who's posting stuff. I mean, I guess you could do the thing where you know check phones at the door or something like that. I guess there's quite an irony that us becoming almost entirely digital due to a pandemic actually created more digital control from like a presentation of it. Because like if you were to say like, oh, we're obsessed with control, we don't want people sharing things before, if you were to say that before, you know, 2020, someone would have just been like, it's too late, it will never go back. You know what I mean? And like,
Yeah.
I guess you could do a video back then, but people would have said, well, but that's not how it's done, or the Federation would have said that's not how, you know, we don't allow that or something like that, or that's not, you know, real fashion, quote, whatever. I think that part's really interesting. And I think I think Archie, you said it before, but the best part is like, so maybe we'll do videos for a little bit more, but there's going to hopefully be some new trend in 3 years. I would love like that this clean slate to the format allows things to change faster rather than it being so strict all the time, or there being these like industry frameworks you can't get out of. People should be able to like literally do whatever and not have it be like, oh, where's their brand at? Why are they doing this? Are they getting smaller? They're getting bigger. I love that hopefully this encourages more regular change.
Yeah, and hopefully that change doesn't just stop at the shows, but it infiltrates the brands, how they make clothes, when they make clothes, when it's offered.
Yeah,
all of it.
calendar, sale process, all of that stuff. Like I mean, at the end of the day, fashion shows happen on such a strict schedule because that's the buying schedule. And the buying schedule is so strict because of people's sales schedules. And people's sales schedule was just invented by one dude in like the 80s. Like all of this stems from like one guy who said, let's make shit cheaper so people buy it faster and we have a more successful department store on paper. Like it's not hard to break out of the cycle once you realize it only stems from like those couple things.
How much of an impact has it had on your business doing things this way?
I think it's nice having some sort of like structure realistically, because I'm the type of person like who would have spent an extra 3 weeks on that video and then an extra 3 weeks on finishing things from the collection in a slightly different way to present it. But in terms of, I would love the freedom to be able to just make this stuff whenever we want, because I think it would still follow some sort of format and schedule, or at least just pace, because putting one of these out is honestly pretty exciting and you want to get to the next one immediately. But it's difficult when being a small team. It's like you don't really have like the financial ability to just do these whenever you want or make stuff whenever you want, because you'll go to a store and they'll be like, sorry, our budget was spent during these 3 weeks of the year.
How much is it getting brought up by your buyers, new or old, like the videos and like and the new process? Like how different did it feel for them, or any feedback you got from them?
They love the shows. They don't like not being able to touch stuff.
Interesting. Do you have any clever solutions for that long term? I spend a lot of time thinking about that actually, like old school atelier models or couturiers used to ship around books and things like that. You know, what would you
Yeah,
think?
no, we do every season. We try to be better for the buyers than other brands by just sending like, it's a swatch book that's like this size. It's like 2 by 2 inch squares, hole punched. We put a little ring around it with codes on everything that's saying like in the line sheet, this number piece is this fabric. Like look at it that way instead of a whole book. Like there are some brands that send you like a wardrobe of like 40-pound moving boxes that buyers have to go through. And it's like, at the end of the day, these are just people with jobs who like most likely have an apartment. And if like all of these different brands are sending them this amount of shit, it's not fun for anyone anymore. So that, I mean, showrooms were always nice, but it's also nice to be able to just be like, here's our fabric swatches. Like if you have questions, we can talk, versus such a super formal, intimidating environment where it's like you're in my space and you're here to critique it.
Well, I mean, I remember, I think that was when we were just starting to hang out, but like your first showroom,
Mm-hmm.
when was that? What year was that?
2018.
Like well before the shows and things like that. There is this like, dare I say,
January 2018.
trade show-esque vibe where there's a lot of waiting around for like people,
dude,
for buyers to show up and then they cancel on you. I mean, like if I was in your shoes, that's like nerve-wracking. It's horrible.
I was at that showroom. I mean, granted, that was the first one and no one knew who the hell we were, but being there for 6 days and only having like 9 appointments, like these appointments last 15 minutes for people who don't know. So the rest of it is literally just sitting. It was January, it was cold, it was raining, and you're just kind of just sitting like in this art gallery you rented and put some clothes against the wall and like decorated a little bit. And you're there like, all right, this is going to be it. We're going to like hit something big here. As soon as we open this door, everyone's coming through. And then it's like, it's open and you're there like,
Did you hear me?
Yeah.
win. Like it's really hard. And even like when we did the show in January of 2020, like coming right after the Palais de Tokyo show, it's like we only had like 40 appointments that week. It's not like it's never some huge action-packed thing. It's a lot of waiting around, and it always feels like it's being critiqued.
Yeah, and it's like semi-awkward too. I mean, you know, it's like just, yeah, I mean, everyone wants to hear from the designer, but designers don't or necessarily need to be like the best communicators, you know, in person.
I'm definitely not the best
I think you're
communicator.
actually pretty good at it, but I mean, I've seen you, but like, I think like there's some people, it's like, it's terrifying to them. They're like, the clothes do the talking. I don't, you know, and it's like, I guess the digital stuff as this happens is a new tool to
Yeah.
hopefully a little bit better communicate.
Yeah. Tom, what do you got? Anything?
I mean, I'm just
You're
kind of
pretty
taking in
fun. We
everything
got
you guys.
we got super deep into like the actual like fashion part of this whole thing, and you're kind of removed from that.
I don't know.
Yeah,
there's a
I'm
cool
not.
T-shirt on.
I'm not fashionable in the slightest. No, I was just kind of taking in what you guys are saying and kind of thinking about it from the perspective of someone who's not necessarily working on these shows as closely, but kind of seeing it come together, like, you know, from working on the product with you and then us talking about like how that's going to be seen in person, you know, kind of the flags from this collection were kind of like an ongoing motif throughout all of it. And I was just sat here kind of thinking about how perhaps the collections themselves have been shaped by the idea of these shows being digital. So say, for example, with that flag motif thing, if it wasn't for the fact that it was going to be this digital show in California, would you necessarily have had the whole flag thing, given that you wouldn't have had that location in Paris, and then we wouldn't have had these flag graphics that become, you know, a centerpiece of the collection graphically, and then all the other product that's kind of derived from that. So it's kind of interesting to think about like how that may have impacted the clothing itself, which I guess is kind of, you know, what a lot of it's
I
hinged
think
on.
that ties back to just the shows and the clothing and the collections rather being designed in parallel. I mean, knowing us, if we were to do that, if we had to have done this in Paris in a place where we couldn't have done that, we would have come up with something else. But it's definitely, they work in tandem.
For sure. I wonder if like that's kind of almost strengthened these collections in other ways too, by you being able, like obviously the brand has this whole kind of outdoor theme and recreational theme that's like very evident like in the product and in the collections you've had, but it's almost giving you like a like even more to pull from like in these formative years where you're really trying to ingrain like what the brand is about and like what your vantage point is, I guess.
What I think strengthens it more than anything is it's definitely stronger now than it was, but it's always been there. It's just when you do a show or a lookbook, you can't actually go online the next day and be like, hey, look at the through line between this, and this. Like, trust me, it's cool once you put it together. Like, because then you sound like an idiot. But if you have cameras that can zoom in on very specific things, like zoom in onto the sleeve of her jacket and then pan out to all the flags, it's going to be the same graphic. It's going to look dope. People start to pick up on that if you can basically just put it right in front of them like that. That's what I think has strengthened it. And that just comes down from like the control of being able to show how it's perceived, or like basically just edit it to what exactly you want to show. And you get the things where you want to focus on that would have been there in the first place, but maybe not everyone would have caught them.
So I guess that kind of comes back to what you were saying earlier about future formats of the show and like choosing the format in which you want to display it. Comes back to the idea itself. So
yeah,
what are we trying to say with this collection? Does it make sense to make it video? Does it make sense to have it digital, in person, a combination of the two? Yeah.
All right. If you guys just want to send whatever file list came out as to Winslade, we'll figure out something with Andre and put it all together.
On it. Thanks, Andre, for being
Yeah,
here.
we'll make something happen.
Yeah, thanks, Andre.
Thanks,
Good to
Andre.
catch up, Andre. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Andre.